What do you think about Dharma situation in the world, as I can
Is
say
it still
that?
alive in the hearts of many men, or there are only few?
You mean Buddhism?
In your
specifically, or spiritual values in general?
Buddhism, yes, it could be.
Well, just now, about 10 days ago, I came from eastern Tibet, and there we were just blown away by the intensity of people's practice there. You know, after 50 years of communist rule, the Dharma is absolutely exploding in eastern Tibet. And there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in long-term retreats and in the monastic colleges, and the devotion of just the lay people when lamas came was really heart-stopping. And so suddenly in eastern Tibet the Dharma is doing very well. In the rest of the world, in some places it's doing better than in others. I think, like many religions all over the world, it is a lot of, you know, there's been a lot of weeds growing up, and some of the plants are pretty old and sticky and need to be pulled out. But I think that there is also a lot of new saplings growing. As certain, for example, I mean, one would take, for example, in a traditional Chinese society, the ordinary people, they didn't know much about Buddhism. They had a lot of faith, but they didn't know what it was, really. And so they would go to the temples, they would make offerings, they would do a few prayers, which they usually didn't understand because it's in classical Chinese. But, you know, it has its own power just because it's prayers, like saying Latin when you don't know Latin. And then there was the next generation of educated young people coming up, and originally many of them were becoming attracted to Christianity because they thought it was modern and this is what the West is into. And so they looked at the kind of very superstitious way that their elders were relating to religion, and so they were much more interested in Christianity. Now you have the next generation, or that generation got a bit older. They are now looking again at Buddhism, not the superstitious, just offering joss sticks in the temple type, but what is Buddhism? What has it got to say? How can it help me in my life? And, you know, about meditation, and they're reading books, they're having study groups. These lay groups are very strong. People study, they question, they meditate. And there's this whole new rise of educated middle-class professionals who have really invigorated the Dharma now. And it's become, in a way, sort of almost, it's not Western exactly, but when Western Sangha, especially monks and nuns, come to these countries, then, you know, I mean, like if I give a talk in Singapore, like 3,000 people will turn up because they're very interested in the way that Western people explain the Dharma. We speak their language better than their own monks and nuns often, because we use an everyday language which they relate to and relate the Dharma into their own lives instead of just making it something very abstract. And so now there's in Korea, in China, in Taiwan, in Singapore, etc., there's a whole resurgence coming up among the educated middle class, which is a very different look than it had traditionally, where usually the lay people were not educated, so they just had a lot of faith but not much knowledge.
So do you think it's better, or than?
I think for many people it has much more depth than it ever had before, because now they're finally curious to know what did the Buddha actually say.
Yeah, knowledge with faith. This is
Well, you know, they have faith, but you know, if you don't really know what you've got faith in, then it's a very fragile faith. When you've really looked and seen and experienced for yourself that this is helpful, then, you know, that is very grounded faith. And the Buddha never praised blind faith. I mean, he always said you should question and you should, you know, doubt and you should really investigate for yourself until you've seen that this is true. Then you believe. But, you know, just believing for the sake of believing was never praised by Buddha.
I don't know, I have one question more. How, this is also a simple question, but I don't know, it's quite important, I think. How important is praying in
Praying.
Buddhism? Yeah.
I think it depends which school you belong to. In the Mahayana, that is Chinese, Korea, Japan, Tibet, then prayer is regarded as being quite important, insofar as it's a lifting up the mind to, you know, to invoke the blessings. I mean, a lot of prayer depends on what you're praying for. You know, and in Buddhism, because we have many Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the Mahayana, you pray to specific people for specific things, you know. It's rather like, to my mind, it's a bit like if you're writing to the government, you know, and you have a problem with your plumbing or your taxes, you don't, you know, you don't send a letter to the Prime Minister. You send a letter to the finance department or, you know, the plumbing department. And so, therefore, especially in Tibetan Buddhism, of course, where they have so many different bodhisattvas, if you're sick, then you pray to this one, and if you're having problems with that, you pray to that one. If you want enlightenment, you pray to someone else. So, depending on what is their particular department they're in charge of, you send over your requests. The idea being that provided you have the karma for it, and that it would actually benefit you, that your wishes were fulfilled, they might actually help. But if you don't have the karma, and if, in fact, for example, your being sick might be a way for you to actually benefit spiritually, then they'll probably leave you alone. Because we often pray for things thinking that's what we want, but actually it's the worst thing we could get. And so therefore, if someone had great wisdom and compassion, they would see, oh, they think that they want, you know, so-and-so to you know, fall in love and marry them, but actually that's not what that would be a disaster, in which case they wouldn't help. If they saw that that would be maybe useful, maybe they might help, if they have the karma to come together. But in general, people are encouraged not to pray for worldly concerns, but to pray for spiritual concerns. Because if you pray for, you know, that your mind will be transformed, that you will have important realizations, that you'll really be able to live to benefit others, then you are lifting up your heart beyond yourself and as it were, plugging into a source of energy. You know, it's a bit like if you can imagine the whole universe is full of spiritual electricity. If you don't plug yourself in, then however much electricity is there, you're not going to benefit if your plug just sits there. But if you plug into the socket, then you can get the current coming through. So it's like that. It's like, you know, trying to plug yourself in. But then what do you want? You know, I mean, most of the prayers, at least in Buddhism, are for spiritual advancement. So in that way, prayer is important, yes, because you're connecting yourself with a higher force.